The morning sun cast long shadows across the ceremonial grounds of the royal palace, as Sergeant William Hayes adjusted his position beside Thunder, his magnificent black stallion. Thunder stood perfectly still, his muscles tense but controlled, ears alert to every sound around them. This was their daily routine, standing guard at the palace gates representing centuries of tradition and honor. William had been working with guard horses for 12 years, but Thunder was special. The stallion had an unusual ability to sense people's emotions, something that made him both an excellent guard horse and occasionally unpredictable. Thunder could tell the difference between a tourist taking photos and someone with bad intentions from 50 feet away. On this particular Tuesday morning, the palace was expecting a special group of visitors. Sarah Mitchell, the palace tour coordinator, had spent weeks preparing for the arrival of 30 children and young adults from Sunshine House, a local care facility for people with special needs. This would be their first visit to the palace, and Sarah wanted everything to be perfect. The WEF group had been planning this trip for months. Many of the residents at Sunshine House rarely left the facility, and a visit to see the famous guard horses was like a dream come true for them. James, a 22-year-old with Down syndrome, had been talking about meeting the horses for weeks. He carried a small notebook where he had drawn pictures of horses and written their names in his careful handwriting. Emma, a 16-year-old girl with autism, had been both excited and nervous about the trip. Large crowds and new places often overwhelmed her, but her fascination with horses was stronger than her anxiety. She had memorized facts about different horse breeds and could recite the history of the guard horses from memory. As the morning progressed, William noticed Thunder becoming more restless than usual. The horse kept turning his head toward the main road, as if sensing something approaching. Other guards had mentioned that their horses seemed unusually alert today, but William attributed it to the change in routine that the special visitors would bring. The bus carrying the Sunshine House group pulled up to the palace gates just after 10 o'clock. Through the windows, William could see excited faces pressed against the glass, hands waving, and the unmistakable energy of people about to experience something wonderful. Sarah Mitchell hurried over to greet them, clipboard in hand and a warm smile on her face. As the visitors began to exit the bus, William immediately noticed something remarkable happening with Thunder. The stallion's entire demeanor changed. His rigid military posture softened, his ears moved forward in a welcoming gesture, and he let out a gentle nicker that seemed to acknowledge the approaching group. This was completely unlike Thunder's usual behavior around tourists. James was among the first to step off the bus, his eyes wide with wonder as he spotted the guard horses. He clutched his notebook tightly and moved slowly toward the horses, his caregiver, Mrs. Peterson, walking beside him. Emma followed close behind, her hands flapping slightly with excitement, a behavior that helped her manage her emotions when overwhelmed. The other visitors formed a loose group, each person reacting differently to their first sight of the magnificent guard horses. Some moved forward eagerly while others hung back, needing encouragement from their caregivers. The diversity of the group was striking. Different ages, different needs, but all united by their shared excitement about meeting the horses. What happened next surprised everyone, including the experienced guards. Thunder, who normally remained perfectly still during public viewing times, began to show signs of recognition and gentleness that the guards had never seen before. His breathing became deeper and more relaxed, and he lowered his head slightly, as if trying to appear less intimidating to his visitors. Sarah noticed the change in the horses immediately. She had coordinated hundreds of tours, but she had never seen the guard horses respond this way to visitors. The other horses in the ceremonial line were showing similar behavior, ears forward, gentle movements, and what could only be described as welcoming body language. William found himself wondering if horses could somehow sense the pure intentions and joy of their special visitors. In his years of service, he had seen the horses react to all kinds of people, some with suspicion, some with indifference, and some with mild interest. But this was different. This was recognition. Almost as if the horses understood that these visitors needed something more than a typical tourist experience. The morning air was filled with quiet excitement as the group approached the ceremonial area. caregivers spoke, in soft, encouraging tones to help their charges feel comfortable in the new environment. The palace staff had prepared for this visit by creating a more relaxed atmosphere than usual, understanding that their special guests might need additional time and patience. Mrs. Peterson guided James forward, explaining in simple terms what they were seeing. "These are the guard horses, James. They protect the palace and stand here every day. Look how beautiful and strong they are." James nodded solemnly, understanding the importance of what he was witnessing while still feeling the pure joy of being close to the magnificent animals. Emma stood slightly apart from the main group, processing the sensory input of being in a new place with new sounds and smells. The sight of the horses seemed to calm her usual anxiety about unfamiliar environments. She began to rock slightly, a self-soothing behavior, but her eyes remained fixed on the horses with fascination rather than fear. As more members of the group gathered near the ceremonial area, the atmosphere became charged with an unusual energy. The guards exchanged glances, all noticing the unprecedented behavior of their horses. Thunder, in particular, seemed to be focusing his attention on the visitors in a way that suggested he understood this was no ordinary day. The stage was set for something extraordinary to unfold. The combination of these special visitors with their genuine hearts and the intuitive nature of the guard horses created an atmosphere ripe for an unforgettable encounter. What would happen next would challenge everyone's understanding of the connection between humans and animals and create memories that would last a lifetime for everyone present. As the group settled into position for their guided tour, Sarah Mitchell began her carefully prepared presentation about the history and significance of the guard horses. She had modified her usual script to use simpler language and shorter sentences, knowing that some of her visitors might have difficulty following complex explanations. Her voice carried clearly across the ceremonial area as she spoke about the tradition that dated back hundreds of years. James raised his hand eagerly, just as he had learned to do in his classes at Sunshine House. "Can the horses hear us talking?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine curiosity. Sarah smiled and explained that horses have excellent hearing, and that Thunder and his companions were indeed aware of everything happening around them. Emma, still standing slightly apart from the main group, began to recite quietly to herself some of the horse facts she had memorized. Her caregiver, Mr. Rodriguez, recognized this as Emma's way of processing excitement and anxiety simultaneously. He stayed close but gave her space to experience the moment in her own way. Meanwhile, Thunder was displaying behavior that left Sergeant Hayes both amazed and slightly concerned from a protocol standpoint. The stallion kept turning his massive head toward different members of the visiting group, his large dark eyes seeming to make individual connections with various people. This level of interaction was completely outside normal guard horse protocol, but Hayes found himself reluctant to correct Thunder's behavior when it seemed so genuinely caring. Michael, a 19-year-old with cerebral palsy who used a wheelchair, had positioned himself near the front of the group. His limited mobility meant that getting the best possible view was important for his enjoyment of the experience. As Thunder's gaze settled on Michael, something remarkable occurred. The great horse took a small step forward, still maintaining his ceremonial position but clearly trying to get closer to the young man in the wheelchair. Other visitors began to notice Thunder's unusual behavior. Lisa, a 25-year-old woman with intellectual disabilities, pointed excitedly and called out, "The horse is looking at us. He wants to be our friend." Her joy was infectious, spreading through the group and creating an atmosphere of shared wonder. The other guard horses began following Thunder's lead. Majesty, a beautiful gray mare stationed next to Thunder, started showing similar signs of interest in the visitors. She nickered softly, a sound that caused several members of the group to gasp with delight. Even Storm, typically the most stoic of the guard horses, relaxed his rigid posture and began to acknowledge the presence of their special guests. Sarah found herself departing from her planned presentation as she realized something unprecedented was happening. In all her years of coordinating palace tours, she had never witnessed the guard horses showing such clear signs of emotional connection with visitors. She made a quick decision to allow more interaction time, sensing that this was becoming a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Mrs. Peterson approached Sarah quietly and asked if it would be possible for James to get a little closer to Thunder. She explained that James had been drawing pictures of horses for months in preparation for this visit, and that meeting Thunder was the fulfillment of a major goal for him. Sarah looked toward Sergeant Hayes, seeking guidance on how to handle this unusual request. Hayes found himself in an unprecedented situation. Military protocol dictated strict guidelines about public interaction with the guard horses, but the genuine need of these visitors and the remarkable response of the horses themselves created a scenario that his training had never covered. After a moment of consideration, he made a decision that would later be remembered as one of the most compassionate moments in the history of the guard unit. "We can make an exception today," Hayes announced, his voice carrying the authority of his rank but softened by genuine warmth. "Thunder seems to want to meet his visitors properly." The announcement was met with excited murmurs and a few tears of joy from the caregivers who understood how meaningful this opportunity would be for their charges. James was chosen to be the first to approach Thunder more closely, with Mrs. Peterson guiding his steps. As they moved forward, Thunder lowered his magnificent head, bringing himself closer to James's eye level. The young man's face lit up with pure joy as he found himself mere inches away from the horse he had dreamed of meeting. "Hello, Thunder," James whispered, his voice filled with awe. "I drew pictures of you in my book. You're even more beautiful than I imagined." Thunder remained perfectly still, allowing James to experience this moment fully. The horse's breathing was calm and steady, creating a peaceful presence that seemed to envelop both James and everyone watching. Emma, observing from her position with the main group, began to move closer on her own. Her usual anxiety about new situations seemed to have been completely overcome by her fascination with the horses. Mr. Rodriguez followed at a respectful distance, ready to provide support if needed, but recognizing that Emma was managing this experience beautifully on her own. The other visitors watched in amazement as this unprecedented interaction continued. Some began to move closer themselves, inspired by James's successful encounter with Thunder. The caregivers worked together to ensure that everyone who wanted to participate could do so safely, while also respecting the comfort levels of those who preferred to observe from a distance. Thunder's behavior continued to astound the experienced guards. The stallion seemed to understand instinctively how to interact with each person who approached him. With James, he remained very still and calm. When Emma finally worked up the courage to come closer, Thunder's response was even more remarkable. He seemed to sense her need for gentle, predictable movement and adjusted his behavior accordingly. "Sergeant." Hayes watched in amazement as his horse, trained for military precision and ceremonial perfection, transformed into something resembling a therapy animal. Thunder's natural intelligence and emotional sensitivity were being displayed in ways that training manuals never could have prepared Hayes to expect. The bond forming between the horse and these special visitors was clearly mutual and profound. As word of the unusual interaction spread among the palace staff, other employees began to gather at a respectful distance to witness what was happening. Palace Security Coordinator Captain Morrison had been notified of the situation and came to observe, initially concerned about protocol violations, but quickly recognizing that something truly special was taking place. The morning sun climbed higher, casting a warm glow over the ceremonial area, where an extraordinary connection was forming between the guard horses and their visitors from Sunshine House. What had begun as a routine educational tour was evolving into something that would touch the hearts of everyone present and create memories that would be treasured for years to come. Emma finally reached the point where she felt comfortable approaching Thunder directly. Her steps were careful and deliberate, each movement representing a victory over the anxiety that usually held her back in new situations. As she drew closer, Thunder seemed to sense her cautious nature and remained completely motionless, becoming like a living statue that posed no threat or unpredictable elements that might overwhelm her sensitive nervous system. When Emma was close enough to reach out and touch Thunder's neck, she paused and looked back at Mr. Rodriguez for encouragement. He nodded and gave her a thumbs up, his own eyes reflecting the pride he felt watching her overcome her fears. Emma turned back to Thunder and slowly extended her hand, her fingers making contact with the horse's warm, smooth coat. The moment was electric with emotion. Emma's face transformed from concentration to pure wonder as she felt the gentle strength beneath Thunder's skin. She began to speak softly to the horse, sharing some of the facts she had memorized about guard horses. "Your breed is called a Hanoverian," she whispered. "You're trained to stand very still, but you can also run very fast when you need to." Thunder's ear twitched slightly, as if acknowledging her words. Meanwhile, Michael had been watching from his wheelchair, clearly longing to participate more fully in the experience. His cerebral palsy made it difficult for him to reach out from his seated position, but his eyes never left the horses. Sergeant Hayes noticed Michael's situation and approached him directly. "Would you like to meet Thunder too?" Hayes asked gently. Michael's face lit up with excitement as he nodded vigorously. Hayes carefully guided Thunder to turn slightly, bringing the horse's head closer to Michael's wheelchair level. The adjustment was subtle but made all the difference in allowing Michael to reach out and touch the horse's muzzle. Thunder's response to Michael was perhaps the most remarkable yet. The great stallion seemed to understand instinctively that this young man's physical challenges required extra patience and accommodation. Thunder held his head perfectly steady, even lowering it slightly to make contact easier for Michael. When Michael's hand finally touched Thunder's soft nose, the young man let out a sound of pure joy that brought tears to many of the watching adults. "He's so soft," Michael managed to say, his words sometimes difficult to understand due to his condition, but his meaning crystal clear to everyone present. "Thank you, Thunder. Thank you for letting me touch you." The horse's response was a gentle exhale through his nostrils, warm air that tickled Michael's palm and caused him to laugh. With delight, other members of the group were now gathering courage to approach the horses themselves. Lisa, who had been pointing and calling out earlier, stepped forward with her characteristic enthusiasm. Her approach was more direct than Emma's careful movements, but Thunder adapted his behavior accordingly, remaining calm and welcoming as Lisa reached out to pet his neck. "You're the most beautiful horse in the whole world," Lisa announced loudly, her voice carrying across the ceremonial area. "I'm going to tell everyone at Sunshine House about you." Thunder's response was another gentle nicker, as if acknowledging her compliment and accepting her friendship. Majesty, the gray mare positioned next to Thunder, was also beginning to attract attention from the visitors. David, a quiet 17-year-old with autism who had been hanging back from the main interactions, found himself drawn to Majesty's calmer energy. Unlike Thunder's bold presence, Majesty radiated a gentler, more maternal quality that seemed to appeal to David's need for less intense interaction. Corporal Jennifer Walsh, Majesty's handler, recognized what was happening and followed Sergeant Hayes's lead in allowing more interaction than protocol typically permitted. She guided Majesty through subtle movements that brought the mare closer to David without overwhelming him. David's approach was methodical and thoughtful, taking several minutes to work up the courage to reach out and touch Majesty's neck. The connection between David and Majesty was quieter than some of the other interactions, but equally meaningful. David stood beside the mare for several minutes, his hand resting on her neck, both of them seeming to draw comfort from the peaceful contact. Corporal Walsh watched with amazement as Majesty, typically a more reserved horse, seemed to understand exactly what David needed from their interaction. Sarah Mitchell found herself completely abandoning her prepared presentation as she realized that what was happening far exceeded anything she could have planned. She began taking photos with her phone, knowing that these moments needed to be documented not just for the visitors' memories, but as a record of something truly extraordinary happening at the palace. Palace groundskeeper Tom Harrison, who had been working nearby, stopped his tasks to observe the scene. In his 40 years of maintaining the palace grounds, he had seen countless ceremonial events and tourist visits, but nothing had ever moved him like watching these special visitors connect with the guard horses. He quietly called his wife on his mobile phone to tell her about what he was witnessing. As more members of the Sunshine House group participated in meeting the horses, a pattern began to emerge. Each horse seemed capable of adjusting their behavior, to match the needs and comfort level of each individual visitor. With the more outgoing visitors like James and Lisa, the horses were more responsive and interactive. With the quieter, more hesitant visitors like Emma and David, the horses became living statues, providing a calm, non-threatening presence that allowed for gentle interaction. Mrs. Peterson and the other caregivers exchanged amazed glances as they watched their charges experience something that was clearly therapeutic on multiple levels. Many of the residents of Sunshine House struggled with social connections and had difficulty trusting new situations, but the horses seemed to bypass all of those usual barriers with their intuitive responses to each person's individual needs. One of the most touching moments came when 8-year-old Sophie, the youngest member of the group, approached Storm, the largest and most imposing of the guard horses. Sophie had Down syndrome and often felt intimidated by large people or animals, but something about Storm's patient presence drew her forward. As she reached up to touch his leg, which was as high as she could reach, Storm lowered his great head down to her level, bringing himself into her world rather than requiring her to stretch uncomfortably to reach him. The spontaneous burst of applause from the caregivers and palace staff who had gathered to watch brought home the significance of what everyone was witnessing. These weren't just horses performing their ceremonial duties. They had become partners in creating an experience that would impact the lives of these special visitors in ways that would extend far beyond this single morning. Captain Morrison, who had initially come to ensure protocol was being followed, found himself completely captivated by the scene. He made a mental note to document this event in his official reports, not as a protocol violation but as an example of the guard unit, adapting to serve the community in an unexpected and beautiful way. As the interactions continued, something unexpected began to happen that surprised even the most experienced horse handlers present. The guard horses started to show behaviors that went beyond their normal responses to any visitors, regardless of their special needs. Thunder began to nuzzle gently against James's shoulder, a sign of affection that horses typically reserve for their closest human companions, or other horses they consider family. James was overwhelmed with joy at this gesture. He wrapped his arms around Thunder's neck in a gentle hug, whispering, "I love you too, Thunder. You're my best friend." The sight of this young man with Down syndrome embracing one of the kingdom's most prestigious ceremonial horses brought tears to the eyes of everyone watching, including several of the tough, experienced guards who thought they had seen everything in their military careers. Emma, still standing close to Thunder, began to share more of her extensive knowledge about horses with anyone who would listen. Her usual social anxiety seemed to have completely disappeared in the presence of these magnificent animals. "Did you know that horses can remember human friends for years and years?" she asked Mr. Rodriguez. "Thunder will remember us even if we don't come back for a long time." As if to prove Emma's point, Thunder turned his attention to her after his embrace with James, gently touching her arm with his muzzle. Emma giggled, a sound that Mr. Rodriguez realized he had rarely heard from her in all the months he had been her caregiver. The horses were bringing out aspects of these individuals that their daily caregivers seldom had the opportunity to witness. Michael, still positioned in his wheelchair near Thunder, was experiencing his own breakthrough moment. His physical limitations often left him feeling excluded from activities that other young people took for granted, but Thunder's patient attention was giving him an experience of connection that transcended his physical challenges. "Mom is never going to believe this," he said to his caregiver, Mrs. Chen. "Can we take lots of pictures?" Mrs. Chen was already documenting every moment, understanding the profound impact this experience was having on Michael. In the 3 years she had been working with him, she had never seen him so animated and confident. The way Thunder continued to hold his head at exactly the right level for Michael to maintain contact showed an intelligence and compassion that exceeded anything she had expected from a ceremonial horse. Sophie, the youngest visitor, had managed to capture Storm's complete attention. The massive horse had positioned himself so that his head was at her eye level, and the two were engaged in what could only be described as a conversation. Sophie chattered away about her favorite toys, her pet goldfish, and her upcoming birthday party, while Storm listened with apparent interest, occasionally nickering softly in response. "I think Storm understands everything I'm saying," Sophie announced to her caregiver, Mrs. Taylor. "He's a very smart horse." Mrs. Taylor had to agree. Storm's responses seemed perfectly timed to Sophie's pauses, creating an interaction that felt remarkably like genuine communication between species. David's quiet connection with Majesty had evolved into something deeper as well. The young man, who typically struggled with expressing emotions or forming connections with others, was now stroking the mare's neck with gentle rhythmic movements. Majesty stood perfectly still, seeming to understand that David needed this peaceful, non-demanding interaction to feel comfortable. "She likes me," David said quietly to Corporal Walsh, his voice filled with wonder. "I can tell she likes me," Walsh nodded, recognizing that for David, who often felt misunderstood or different, this acceptance from Majesty was profoundly meaningful. The mare's patient presence was giving David an experience of being valued exactly as he was. Lisa, true to her outgoing nature, had moved on to meeting all three horses, treating each one like a new best friend. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and several of the more hesitant members of the group began to follow her lead, approaching horses they hadn't yet met. Lisa appointed herself as an unofficial guide, introducing other visitors to each horse by name and sharing what she had learned about their personalities. "Thunder is very friendly and likes hugs," she announced to the group. "Majesty is gentle and quiet, and Storm is big but really nice." Her simple descriptions helped other visitors know what to expect, reducing anxiety and encouraging more participation from those who had been hanging back. The palace staff who had gathered to observe were becoming increasingly amazed by what they were witnessing. Tom Harrison, the groundskeeper, called over his colleague Maria Santos, who worked in the palace gift shop. "You have to see this," he told her. "These horses are acting like they're trained therapy animals, but nobody taught them to do any of this." Maria watched in amazement as the interactions continued to unfold. In her 15 years of working at the palace, she had seen the guard horses maintain their stoic ceremonial poses through all kinds of weather, crowds, and distractions. But today they seemed to have transformed into entirely different creatures, still magnificent and powerful, but also gentle, intuitive, and genuinely caring. Sergeant Hayes found himself facing a dilemma he had never encountered in his military career. The interactions were clearly beneficial for the visitors and were happening naturally, without any stress to the horses. However, they were also completely outside normal protocol, and he wasn't sure how his superiors would react if they learned about the extent of the interaction that was being allowed. His concerns were somewhat alleviated when Captain Morrison approached him directly. "Sergeant Hayes," the captain said, "I want you to know that what you're allowing here today shows exceptional judgment and compassion. These horses are serving their community in a way that goes beyond ceremony, and you should be commended for recognizing the value of what's happening." The validation from his superior officer allowed Hayes to fully embrace the unprecedented situation. He began to actively facilitate more interactions, helping position the horses to accommodate visitors who wanted to meet them and ensuring that everyone who wanted to participate could do so safely. As the morning progressed toward noon, it became clear that this was no ordinary visit. Word had begun to spread among the palace staff about what was happening with the guard horses and their special visitors. Kitchen staff stepped outside during their breaks to observe. Maintenance workers found excuses to work in the area, and even some of the administrative staff came down from their offices to witness the remarkable interactions. The atmosphere had become celebratory, filled with laughter, gentle conversation, and the kind of joy that comes from witnessing something truly special. The visitors from Sunshine House were experiencing not just a tour of a historic site, but a genuine connection with these magnificent animals that would become one of the most treasured memories of their lives. Mrs. Peterson gathered the caregivers together for a brief conference. "I think we need to extend our visit if possible," she said quietly. "This is clearly having a profound impact on everyone, and I don't want to cut it short if we can avoid it." The other caregivers agreed unanimously. They were witnessing breakthrough moments for several of their charges, and the therapeutic value of the experience was immeasurable. As the extended visit continued, the bonds between the horses and their new friends deepened in ways that surprised everyone present. Thunder, who had initially connected so strongly with James, began to show equal attention to other members of the group, as if understanding that his affection needed to be shared among all these special visitors. James, however, remained Thunder's primary focus. The young man had pulled out his carefully maintained notebook and was now sitting on a nearby bench, sketching Thunder from life while the horse posed as if he understood he was being drawn. The concentration on James's face as he worked to capture Thunder's likeness was intense, and his artistic skills, often overlooked due to his intellectual disability, were clearly evident in his detailed drawings. "Look, Thunder," James said, holding up his sketch. "This is you." Thunder actually turned his head to look at the notebook, causing James to laugh with delight. He knows it's him. Thunder is really smart. The interaction was so natural and genuine that observers could almost forget they were watching a ceremonial military horse rather than a beloved family pet. Emma had discovered that she could share her extensive knowledge about horses with the horses themselves, and they seemed to listen intently to her recitations. She stood beside Majesty, explaining the differences between various horse breeds while the mare's ears remained pricked forward, as if genuinely interested in the educational presentation. "Majesty, you're a Hanoverian like Thunder, but you're gray and he's black," Emma explained seriously. "Gray horses aren't really gray. You're actually white hairs mixed with dark hairs, which makes you look gray. When you get older, you'll become whiter." Majesty's response was a gentle nuzzle against Emma's shoulder, which Emma interpreted as appreciation for the information. Michael had become the center of what could only be described as a multi-horse reception committee. All three horses had managed to position themselves so that he could reach each of them from his wheelchair, creating a semicircle of equine attention that made him feel like the most important person in the world. His usual frustration with his physical limitations had been completely replaced by joy and wonder. "I feel like a king," Michael told Mrs. Chen, his voice filled with happiness. "The horses are like my royal court," Mrs. Chen smiled. Understanding that this metaphor was perfect for their palace setting and recognizing how the experience was boosting Michael's self-confidence in ways that months of therapy had not achieved. Sophie had appointed herself as Storm's personal storyteller, regaling the patient horse with elaborate tales about her imaginary adventures. Storm listened to every word with apparent fascination, occasionally nickering at dramatic moments in her stories, which delighted Sophie and encouraged her to become even more creative with her narratives. And then, the princess rode the magic horse over the rainbow, Sophie concluded one of her stories, and they lived happily ever after. "Do you like happy endings, Storm?" Storm's response was to lower his head and gently touch Sophie's hand with his muzzle, which she took as definitive approval of her storytelling abilities. David's connection with Majesty had evolved into a peaceful meditation of sorts. The young man stood quietly beside the mare, his hand resting on her neck, both of them seeming to draw strength and calm from their connection. Corporal Walsh observed that Majesty's breathing had synchronized with David's, creating a harmony between human and horse that was almost hypnotic to watch. "I think they understand us better than most people do," David said quietly to Corporal Walsh. It was perhaps the most profound observation of the entire day. These horses seemed to see past disabilities and differences to connect with the essential humanity of each visitor. Lisa, meanwhile, had taken on the role of group photographer, borrowing various caregivers' phones and cameras to document everyone's interactions with the horses. Her natural enthusiasm made her perfect for the job, and she had an uncanny ability to capture the exact moments when the connections between horses and visitors were most evident. "Everyone needs pictures with their new horse friends," Lisa announced. "These are going to be the best pictures ever." Her joy was infectious, and even the most camera-shy members of the group found themselves posing happily with their equine companions. The palace staff who had gathered to observe were beginning to understand that they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. Dr. Patricia Williams, the palace veterinarian who had arrived to check on the horse's welfare during this unusual situation, was amazed by what she found. In 30 years of working with horses, Dr. Williams told Captain Morrison, "I've never seen anything like this. These horses are demonstrating emotional intelligence and social awareness, that exceeds what we typically expect from even the most well-trained therapy animals. And they're doing it instinctively, without any special training. Captain Morrison nodded, recognizing that they were witnessing something that would need to be properly documented and perhaps studied. "Do you think we should be concerned about the horses' well-being?" he asked. "This is certainly outside their normal routine." Dr. Williams shook her head. "Quite the opposite. Look at their body language. They're relaxed, engaged, and clearly enjoying the interactions. This seems to be as beneficial for them as it is for the visitors. Horses are naturally social animals, and these ceremonial roles, while important, don't always allow them to express that side of their nature." Sarah Mitchell had long since abandoned any pretense of conducting a normal tour. Instead, she was moving among the groups, facilitating interactions and ensuring that everyone who wanted to participate could do so. She found herself thinking about how this experience could potentially be replicated in the future, wondering if there might be ways to create more opportunities for special needs individuals to interact with the guard horses. The transformation in the visitors was remarkable to observe. Several individuals who had seemed anxious or withdrawn when they first arrived were now confident and engaged. The horses had somehow created a safe space where differences were not just accepted, but celebrated, where each person could interact in their own way without judgment or pressure to conform to normal social expectations. Mrs. Peterson called together the other caregivers for another brief conference. "I know we need to start thinking about departure," she said, "but I'm wondering if there's any way we could arrange to come back again sometime. The therapeutic value of this experience is extraordinary." The caregivers were unanimous in their agreement. They were observing breakthrough moments for several of their charges, increased confidence, improved social interaction, and a level of joy that was rare to see in their daily work. The horses had somehow unlocked potential in these individuals that their regular therapies and activities had not been able to access. Sergeant Hayes, overhearing the conversation, approached the group. "I think I can speak for all the guards when I say that you would be welcome back anytime," he said. "Our horses have clearly found this experience as rewarding as your group has. Perhaps we can work with the palace administration to arrange regular visits." The suggestion was met with enthusiasm from everyone present. What had begun as a one-time special tour was evolving into something with the potential for lasting impact on both the visitors from Sunshine House and the guard horses themselves. The bonds that had formed in a single morning were clearly meant to continue. As the afternoon sun began to cast longer shadows across the palace grounds, it became clear that the time had come for the Sunshine House group to begin their departure. However, saying goodbye to their new equine friends proved to be much more difficult than anyone had anticipated. The bonds that had formed over the past few hours were so strong that both the visitors and the horses seemed reluctant to end their extraordinary encounter. James was the first to struggle with the approaching farewell. He had spent the last hour sitting near Thunder, alternating between sketching in his notebook and simply enjoying the horse's peaceful presence. When Mrs. Peterson gently told him it was time to prepare for departure, his face fell with genuine sadness. "Can't we stay a little longer?" James asked, looking up at Thunder as if the horse might somehow provide a solution. Thunder, as if sensing James's distress, lowered his head and nuzzled the young man's cheek gently. The gesture was so tender and clearly meant to provide comfort that several of the watching adults had to wipe away tears. Emma, who had been sharing her knowledge with the horses throughout the visit, approached each horse individually to say goodbye. Her farewell ritual was characteristically thorough and thoughtful. "Thank you for listening to me tell you about horses," she said to Thunder. "I hope you learned something new today, too." Thunder's response was a soft whinny that Emma chose to interpret as appreciation for their educational exchanges. Michael faced perhaps the most difficult goodbye of all. His wheelchair had become the center of the horses' attention throughout the day, and all three horses had positioned themselves to remain within his reach. As the time for departure approached, the horses seemed to sense that their new friend would be leaving, and their behavior became noticeably more affectionate. "I don't want to say goodbye," Michael told Mrs. Chen honestly. "This has been the best day of my whole life. Thunder, overhearing, stepped closer to Michael's wheelchair and placed his head gently against the young man's shoulder, as if offering a final embrace. The moment was so poignant that even the experienced guards found themselves emotionally moved. Sophie approached Storm for her farewell with characteristic directness. "I have to go home now, Storm," she announced, "but I'm going to come back and visit you again soon. Will you remember me?" Storm's response was to gently touch her small hand with his muzzle, a gesture that Sophie interpreted as a promise to remember their friendship. David's goodbye to Majesty was quieter but equally meaningful. He stood beside the mare for several minutes, his hand resting on her neck, both of them seeming to absorb the peaceful connection they had shared. "Thank you for understanding me," he whispered to Majesty before finally stepping away. The mare watched him go with what could only be described as genuine affection in her large, dark eyes. Lisa, true to her enthusiastic nature, insisted on hugging each horse goodbye and promising to tell everyone at Sunshine House about her new friends. "You're the most wonderful horses in the world," she declared, "and I'm going to dream about you every night." Her joy remained infectious even in the midst of farewells, helping to lighten the mood for others who were struggling with leaving. The group began to gather their belongings and prepare for the bus ride home. Something remarkable happened that none of them had expected. The 3 guard horses, who had maintained their positions throughout the day, began to move closer together, creating what appeared to be a farewell formation. Thunder, Majesty, and Storm positioned themselves side by side, facing their departing friends in what looked like a military salute adapted for the occasion. Sergeant Hayes was astounded by this spontaneous behavior. "I've never seen anything like this," he told Captain Morrison quietly. "They're saying goodbye in their own way." The horses stood perfectly aligned, their heads raised proudly but their eyes focused intently on the group of visitors who had brought such unexpected joy to their day. Sarah Mitchell, recognizing the significance of the moment, quickly organized the group for one final photograph with all 3 horses. The resulting image would become treasured, not just by the visitors but by the palace staff who had witnessed the day's extraordinary events. In the photo, the formal military bearing of the horses, combined with the genuine happiness on every human face, told the complete story of what had transpired. Dr. Williams, the palace veterinarian, made detailed notes about the horses' behavior throughout the day. She was already thinking about the potential implications of what she had observed for animal therapy programs and the understanding of equine emotional intelligence. "This could change how we think about the capabilities of horses," she told Captain Morrison. "What we've seen today suggests levels of empathy and social awareness that exceed our current scientific understanding." As the bus arrived to take the group back to Sunshine House, the farewell process became more organized, but no less emotional. Each visitor had the opportunity for a final moment with their favorite horse, and the caregivers worked to ensure that no one felt rushed or forgotten in the departure process. Mrs. Peterson approached Sergeant Hayes with tears in her eyes. "I cannot thank you enough for what you've allowed to happen here today," she said. "You've given these individuals an experience that will stay with them for the rest of their lives. More than that, you've shown them that they are worthy of love and connection, even from these magnificent animals." Hayes, moved by her words, responded, "Ma'am, I think your group has given our horses something just as valuable. We've seen sides of their personalities today that we never knew existed. They've been as changed by this experience as your visitors have been." The promise of future visits had been formalized during the afternoon. Captain Morrison had spoken with Palace administration and received approval for monthly visits by the Sunshine House group, recognizing both the therapeutic value for the visitors and the positive impact on the horses' well-being. The guard horses would now have regular opportunities to express their naturally social and caring natures. As the bus pulled away from the palace, the visitors pressed their faces to the windows for a final look at their equine friends. Thunder, Majesty, and Storm remained in their farewell formation, watching until the bus disappeared from sight. Even then, the horses seemed reluctant to return to their normal ceremonial positions, as if they too were processing the significance of what had occurred. James clutched his notebook tightly during the ride home, already planning new drawings, based on his memories of the day. Emma sat quietly, organizing her thoughts about everything she had learned and experienced. Michael smiled continuously, reliving his moments of connection with the horses. Sophie chattered excitedly about her conversations with Storm, while David maintained the peaceful contentment that his time with Majesty had given him. Lisa, predictably, was already planning what she would tell everyone about her new horse friends. The story of this extraordinary day would spread far beyond the walls of Sunshine House and the palace grounds. Local media would pick up the story, recognizing its human interest appeal and its larger implications for understanding the connections between humans and animals. The guard horses of the royal palace had demonstrated that compassion, empathy, and the ability to recognize and respond to individual needs were not exclusively human traits. In the months that followed, the monthly visits became the most anticipated events on the Sunshine House calendar. The relationships that had begun on that first magical day continued to deepen, with the horses seeming to remember each visitor and pick up where previous interactions had left off. What had started as a simple educational tour had evolved into a groundbreaking example of interspecies therapy and the profound healing power of unconditional acceptance. The legacy of that first day would extend far beyond the immediate participants. Other special needs facilities requested similar opportunities, leading to the development of a formal program that brought together the therapeutic benefits of animal interaction with the dignity and majesty of the ceremonial guard horses. Thunder, Majesty, and Storm had become more than military horses. They had become ambassadors of hope, teaching everyone who met them about the universal language of kindness and the remarkable capacity for connection that transcends all barriers.